Okay, welcome to Lecture 4. This lecture and this week's readings all deal with criminal justice theories, understanding theories that explain the operations of the criminal justice system and the behaviors of people that work within the criminal justice system. One of the readings you had in week 1 talked about one of the problems we have, one of the weaknesses we've had over the years in criminal justice is a lack of a theoretical foundation, and we're really trying to overcome that, and we've actually made some great strides in the last 2 decades on developing criminal justice theories. So in the academic discipline of criminal justice, we have a growing body of theories we use to explain the behavior of criminal justice agents and criminal justice organizations. Now, this isn't the criminal justice theories course that you have in your master's degree curriculum. That one deals with criminal offenders, so criminology, theories of criminal offending. When we're talking about criminal justice theories here, we're talking about theories that explain not bad guys, not criminals, not crime, but the criminal justice system and how it operates the way it does, and why police officers make the discretionary decisions they do, and judges make the discretionary decisions they do, and probation and parole officers make their discretionary decisions. So theories that explain those behaviors. So what is a theory? A theory is a scientific explanation for an observed behavior. That's all it is. It's not very complex. It's just a very systematic scientific explanation for what you already see going on in your world. But why do we have to learn about theories? Yeah, I usually get complaints like that. Why do we have to learn about theories? How does this apply to my job? What's the relevance do these theories have to the real criminal justice system and the way they work? So let's talk about that. And the way I'm going to talk about that, first off, is to give you a hard science explanation, a hard science example from which then we can use the same analogy to apply to criminal justice theories. So let's look at the theory behind gravity. In fact, gravity is not a theory anymore. It was a theory when Isaac Newton came up with it, but it's been tested enough times and proven absolutely true in the hard sciences, they've actually moved it to what's called a law. It's truth. It's not a theory anymore. So, for millions of years, people knew that when things dropped, they fall to the ground. They don't fly up in the air. That never happens. They always fall to the ground. Big things, small things, lots of things fall to the ground. As soon as they're released, if they're in the air, they're only in the air because they're being held by something up there. So this is an observed behavior. Okay? So we can develop a theory for this observed behavior. We start moving towards that theory, arguing that there's some unseen force that pulls objects towards the surface of the earth. Well, that is not good enough as a theory because it doesn't hold under all conditions, that there's an unseen force that pulls every object towards the surface of the earth. For example, how is it these things, birds, flying insects, how come they're able to overcome this unseen force? Doesn't make sense. So if it's just the theory is that all things are pulled to the surface of the earth. Not true. Smaller things like this can overcome it. So your theory has to be able to explain why things that fall are taken down to the surface of the earth, and that why some things, especially things looking at them built like these in size and shape and weight, are able to overcome this unseen force and levitate themselves up in the air sometimes. Well, you may argue that, well, birds and bees, they're small, they're light, so small and light things may be able to avoid this gravity that's pulling things down to the surface of the earth. Well, okay, you can argue that a turkey cannot fly as well as a sparrow, and a turkey's a lot bigger and heavier. But if that were true, and that was the true reason why, then this thing, the moon, it's pretty big. I don't think there's anything on Earth other than the Earth itself that's bigger than the moon. And it's pretty heavy. I don't think any of us are going to be able to pick this up. So why isn't it sucked down and smacks into the surface of the Earth? So you have to develop a theory that explains why most things are pulled to the surface of the Earth, but small light things are not, or they are, but they can overcome it easily through flapping of wings, where other things can't. They flap their wings all the time, and they, again, like a turkey, is not going to go very far. But then you've got other objects that are bigger and heavier than something like a turkey, and why aren't they pulled down to the surface of the Earth? So your theory has to come up with an explanation for all those things, all those diverse behaviors. And Isaac Newton did just that. He developed a scientific and mathematical theory for gravity that revealed gravity was associated with the mass and density of objects. Okay, so you're partly right when you're saying, well, the turkey is big and heavy. Yeah, it's got mass, but it doesn't necessarily have density. So why isn't the moon sucked down to the surface of the Earth? Because there are things that are more mass, more dense. They're huge objects like Saturn, Jupiter, the Sun, that are pulling the moon in the other direction at the same time. So it's this tug of war from the gravitational pull of the Earth to these other celestial bodies that keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth. A perfect example of this type of the involvement of mass and density with the attraction of objects, and that's what's attracting us. We're attracted to the surface of the Earth because we're much less dense, much less massive than the Earth, so we're sucked into it. If we were bigger, the Earth would be sucked toward us, if we were like Jupiter or Saturn. If you drop a marshmallow in a cup of hot cocoa or coffee, what's it going to do? You don't blow on it, just let it go on its own. If there's no wind, it will very quickly move to the side of your cup. The reason for that is the cup, the ceramic cup, is much more massive, much more dense than that marshmallow. So that marshmallow is sucked to the side. You can see the same thing with swimming pools. If you have a swimming pool with no wind and none of the filters are operating and it's just sitting water, and you put in any type of pool toy, give it an hour, it's going to be by the side of the pool because the concrete of the side of the pool is far more dense, has much more mass than that inflatable pool toy, so it's attracted to it. Okay, big deal. What has this got to do with anything? Well, now, with this theory of gravity and a mathematical formula to explain it, people can predict exactly how gravity will act on objects we create. Gravity is not going to operate the same in outer space as it is on the surface of the planet. Gravity still follows this formula in outer space, and because of this formula, we can predict how weightless we will feel in space, or how much less we will weigh on the moon, but how much more we will weigh on something like Saturn. Okay, don't correct me. I know Saturn's a gaseous planet, and on the surface there is no hard surface to it. But the point is, from this formula, we can predict how gravity is going to behave in all different circumstances. And on the Earth, this is important for designing things like skyscrapers, bridges, airplanes, and spacecraft. We need to know the formula and understand the gravity theory in order to create these things. All right, boyo, what's this got to do with me and me doing my job in law enforcement? Well, this is what it's got to do with it. Like the theory of gravity, helps people understand why gravity behaves as it does and can predict how it's going to behave in outer space and when we build a bridge and when we fly an airplane and things like that. Just like that, criminal justice theories can explain criminal justice behavior. We can use these theories to predict how police officers are going to act, how corrections officers are going to act, how prosecutors are going to act, how probation officers are going to act, how criminal justice agencies will act based on these theories. when studying and trying to understand why criminal justice agents or organizations do what they do, criminal justice theories, if they're correct, can explain these behaviors. It helps criminal justice agents look at their work more objectively when they can see the broad explanations for their own discretionary behavior. I'm like, well, I'm just doing my job and I decided to arrest this person, or I decided not to arrest this person. When you step back and look at your behavior over time, you see there's trends to that behavior. And when you start looking at your peers and take all of the officers on your department as a whole, you find, gosh, there are trends here. And you may be thinking you're making these individual decisions, but over long term, you're actually not. You're following a general pattern. And that can help you understand your own behavior in the field. And when you move into management, it'll help you understand the behavior of the people that work under you. Criminal justice theories are important when trying to prove or disprove statements like, say for instance, the police are racist. Okay, that's a theory. We can try to test that. So when posed as a scientific theory, this suggestion that the police are racist can be tested to determine if there's scientific evidence to support or reject it. Now, again, a theory is there to explain an observed behavior or an observed outcome. And when we look at the criminal justice system, we do see disparate outcomes. We see that people of color are more likely, proportionally, to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, and receive longer sentences. They're more likely to be represented in prison if you're African American or Hispanic than you are if you're white. So these racist outcomes are occurring. But a theory to prove why that, or explain why that's going on, could be that the police are racist. You can test that. What you'll find in testing that is there's not a lot of accuracy in that. If that were the case, every single police officer being hired would be racist. Racist we can prove from interviews of their family members, and every single police officer recruited that they try to recruit police officers that are racist, and that everybody is racist. But that doesn't necessarily explain the conviction rate and the sentencing rates and things like that. So then you would have to expand it to that everybody in the criminal justice system is racist. Well, it would be pretty unlikely that we could get every single person employed in the criminal justice system from the front end all the way to the back end consistently being racist but covering it up. So we need to come up with some other theory that would explain why we do have these disparate outcomes, why African Americans and to a lesser extent Hispanics are more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, more likely to receive a harsher sentence. That can explain that, but the fact that, arguing that all police officers are racist, that theory isn't effective. So we need to find a theory that we can test that reveals truth about the criminal justice system rather than just rhetoric. Because just like with gravity, we have to understand that theory of gravity when designing a bridge. If that's our understanding of the criminal justice system when we try to reduce this disparate outcomes, if you're coming from the perspective of an untested theory where you're arguing that, well, the police are racist and everybody working in the criminal justice system is racist, well, the only way to fix that then is to replace everybody with new people who are not racist. Well, we don't find evidence that even a majority of the people working in the criminal justice system are racist, so you're probably not going to have any different outcome if you could find some magical way to test to prove that everyone working in the criminal justice system doesn't have any racial bias against African Americans. And what you're going to find, even if you did that, you're going to have the same desperate outcomes because there's other things going on in the system. So you have to have a theory that properly explains why these outcomes are happening. And then when you have that theory, you can actually start to not only understand it, but start to develop ideas for policies that might change it. So just like the theory of gravity is incorporated into the design of bridges and buildings, CJ theories should be incorporated in the design of new criminal justice policies. When planning to implement new criminal justice policies, such as mandatory arrest for domestic violence, or the abolition of plea bargaining, or the elimination of parole, all of these things have been attempted. Criminal justice theories can accurately predict how the policy will actually be implemented by either agencies or the actual people on the ground working in the field, and what these side effects will be. Will there be some side effect of that? For example, with mandatory arrest, we started requiring police officers to arrest in domestic violence situations and took away their discretion in domestic violence situations. If there was any evidence that a battery had occurred, the officers in some states are required to arrest. They cannot use their discretion not to an arrest if it's a domestic violence case. Well, you have to understand how the system works and theories of criminal justice agent behavior to understand that, first off, some officers are still going to resist this. They're just going to argue that there wasn't probable cause. Yeah, there was injury, but not enough to make probable cause, and I didn't want to make a false arrest. So some officers are going to circumvent your mandatory arrest policy or mandatory arrest law anyhow. But even those that don't circumvent it, you're going to have a side effect that you didn't think about, and that is, you're at the domestic. She's claiming that he hit her. He's claiming, no, she attacked me first. Rather than try to figure it out, mandatory arrest. If there's any evidence, guess what? Both get arrested. And that's usually not a good thing, because there's usually a primary aggressor. So you're going to definitely cause more damage in that situation, making a dual arrest. But if you understood the theories behind criminal justice agent behavior and you didn't take that into account some way, like proper training on who is the primary aggressor, or writing your statute, writing your policy in a way that they have to focus, not just mandatory arrest, but mandatory arrest of the primary aggressor, and what you get in the result is dual arrests. And that's exactly what happened when we started implementing these mandatory arrest statutes in the 1980s and 1990s. We ended up having massive increase of arrests, but police were arresting both the batterer and the victim in most cases, until we eventually caught on and started to change the wording of these policies. Same thing with eliminating parole. There's a number of states that have, on paper, have claimed to have eliminated parole, and actually they don't. They don't eliminate parole. You have to serve your full sentence. Well, there's not enough space in prison for everyone to serve their full sentences. So what ends up happening is there's more and more early releases, more and more use of good time, and more of intermediate sanctions where technically they're not on parole. We just put them in a halfway house, which is basically the same thing as they're in the community under supervision. That's what parole is. But they put them in a halfway house and they give them programming, but they're still allowed to go out and meet with their family and look for a job and stuff like that. So trying to eliminate, there's a reason we have parole, and trying to eliminate it, the system is just going to react by calling it something else or repackaging it, but it'll still be parole all over again. So understanding these criminal justice theories could help policymakers predict and explain how their policy is actually going to be implemented in the real world. So, this week's readings. First reading is an article in Justice Quarterly called Conceptualizing Criminal Justice Theory. It was written by Tom Bernard from Penn State University, who's no longer with us. He's been deceased for a few years. And Robin Shepard Engel, she's no longer at Penn State. She's at the University of Cincinnati. She was my dissertation advisor and the primary professor I worked for at Cincinnati for all my time there getting my PhD. And this article discusses the fact that the weakness of lack of use of criminal justice theory in our research, and discusses several different theories that have been used and ought to be used more in criminal justice research and policy making, and tries to organize them in a way that's very coherent. Then the remainder of the readings are summary handouts that I've created on 5 different of most common criminal justice theories that you'll encounter. theories for explaining the behavior of criminal justice agents, police officers, judges, prosecutors, probation officers, corrections officers, and explaining criminal justice agency behavior, so police departments, jails, prisons, courts, etc. So these are summaries of books. I did you a favor and distilled all the information down into just a couple pages in an easy, brief handout, so you didn't have to read 5 different books for this week's reading assignments. So the first one is The Theory of the Behavioral Law by Donald Black. There's a picture of Donald Black. He's a professor, I think professor of law at Virginia Commonwealth University. The next theory is The Theory of Street-Level Bureaucracy by Michael Lipsky, political scientist, a theory that I've used quite a bit in my own research. Next is a theory of rational decision-making. This theory is developed by Mike Gottfredson and Don Gottfredson. That's father and son. The son's on the top, obviously that's Michael. And Don Gottfredson's since deceased, but Michael Gottfredson's at Arizona State University, and he's either a vice president or a dean there now. Next is the theory of social conflict. So conflict theory, if you're a Marxist, you'll really like Austin Turk here and his perspectives on the criminal justice system and operations of it. And last is focal concerns theory, which was originally started as a criminological theory explaining juvenile delinquent behavior, but was adapted by Daryl Steffensmeyer here to explain criminal justice agent behavior. He dealt with the courts and used it with the courts, but since then it's been applied to police and corrections as well. So, did you notice anything in common about all these criminal justice theorists I just showed? Well, 2 of the things should have jumped out at you right away. First, all are white. 2, all are male. And what you wasn't as easily noticed was none of them have ever worked in the criminal justice system. All of them are pure academics. So what that means is, if you're someone with criminal justice experience, if you are a person of color, if you are female, perhaps you'd like to think about developing your own theory of criminal justice behavior. If you're looking ahead at an academic career, especially if you want to go on to get your PhD, give this some thought. Now, we've got a overabundance of white male academic perspective. We could use more perspective of people in the field, more perspective of people of color, women, that come in with a different take on things, may have different life experiences that can contribute different theories that might be better than the ones we've got. The ones we've got, there's nothing wrong with them. Actually, you'll find that there's evidence to support all 5 of these. But if all 5 of these are correct, then there probably are others that are correct too that have yet to be discovered. So give that some thought for your future. Some of you may be interested in pursuing research on criminal justice theory. So, don't forget quiz number 4 after you've read through all of these reading assignments. And also don't forget writing assignment 1 is due. And the last part of writing assignment number 1 is you need to pick one of these 5 theories that you're going to use as a foundation for the rest of the course. The remaining 3 writing assignments, you'll have to apply whichever theory you pick. You'll have to apply it to the courts, or excuse me, to the police for writing assignment 2. Have to apply it to the courts in writing assignment 3, and have to apply it to corrections in writing assignment 4. So as you read through these 5 different theories, find which one resonates most with you, which one you think makes the most sense, and select that. And in the last portion of writing assignment 1, you need to tell me which theory you picked and explain why. What is it about it that makes sense to you? What resonates about that to you? And keep in mind, you need to understand that theory pretty well, because from here on out, every writing assignment, you need to look over your readings for Module 2 and come up with evidence to support your theory from those readings. We'll go over the readings in Module 3, and for writing assignment 3, you need to show me evidence from the readings that supports your theory. And again, with Module 4 with corrections. So select carefully, but pick the one that fits best with you and how you already view the criminal justice system. And again, if you run into any problems, any questions, please feel free to email me.